Thanks for that, Sandy. And right now we're joined by the Honorable Governor John DeYoung Jr. Governor, thanks for joining us on the set.
Thank you for inviting me.
Trying times to say the least. This week we're going to see an 8% cut with folks' salary going across the board in government.
Right.
So first off, explain the Economic Stability Act and what it will mean in the short term for the Virgin Islands.
This payday will have a tremendous impact across all of government. I think it'll take away a tremendous anxiety that people have had for a very long time. And the attempt here more than anything is to try to maintain the level of expenditures in government. And I recognize, and I think the legislature recognizes, the tremendous impact this is going to have on individuals and on families. But what we're experiencing in the Virgin Islands is no different than what folks are experiencing, other territories are experiencing, and particularly the United States with the layoffs from teachers, police officers, healthcare workers. And so while the legislature and I had a basic difference at one point, we sort of met in a compromise. And that compromise was that we would try to see if we could achieve the budgetary savings in fiscal year 11 that was required so that we could at least maintain some level of cash resources and continue to run the government. And so the Economic Stabilization Act was that attempt to, one, reduce our expenses, and the 8% will achieve at least a savings, a budgetary savings of $8 million in fiscal year 11 up to September 30th, and an estimated 30-something in fiscal year 12, so that we can reduce what was an estimated $90 million shortfall altogether. But the important part of the Stabilization Act is that it's a way to match our expenditures with our revenues. And the fact is that given the economic climate of what's happened since 2008 all the way through, the revenues that are coming into the government, the resources we have reduced tremendously. And what we've tried to do over that period of time is to try to maintain government services, both in terms of employment, but also in terms of programs for our children, for the health care, just across the board. And in addition to the salary cut, the Stabilization Act has an incentive, and that incentive is for the retirement of those employees that have been in government 29 years and longer, to see what we can do to encourage them to go into retirement, and therefore we can achieve those savings at the same time.
You were extremely critical of the Senate's inaction going into this process. Are you pleased with the outcome thus far?
Well, you know, I think we've exhibited a tremendous amount of creativity. I mean, we have gone since 2007, the latter half of 2007 to 9, without any massive layoffs or reductions of government workers. And the reason we're in this position now is we can no longer borrow, and a number of projects, a number of initiatives that we thought would take hold have not taken hold. I disagreed with the legislature ultimately in the beginning because I thought that they weren't addressing the situation. I have met over 4 times with the unions at various times at Government House. I've invited them to come. We've opened up the books completely to them so they could take a look at it. I've even had their financial advisors that they asked me to meet with, sit down, take a look at the books and take a look at our information, ask us questions to see what they could give us in terms of their recommendations. We've met with the legislature over 15 times, explaining to them, both in terms of meetings at Government House, but also on the Senate floor, exactly what is necessary. I think this is just one piece. We can't get away from the fact that revenue generation and building the economy in the long haul is really going to be what'll really take us out of this situation. But in the short term, at least for now, in the early part of 2012, is try to maintain expenses. Because I don't see the U.S. economy rebounding, and particularly with the debt talks that are taking place at a national level, there's a certain amount of uncertainty, and that uncertainty clearly translates to our economy. So we've got to figure out a way to maintain expenses and at the same time at least set the foundation for growth. And I think this 8% gives us an opportunity to get there. If it doesn't, if by chance the court makes a different decision as a result of what the unions have filed, or if we don't achieve the savings, then we'll have to look at other measures, and those measures can go across the board from dismissals to layoffs.
There's been a lot of criticism from the public and folks directly affected by this plan, some claiming that they were not asked for their input. Is that a fair assumption?
I think the situation we're in will cause people a tremendous frustration. I think any time that you're looking at the possibility of dismissals or layoffs or reduction in salaries, and particularly in this environment, people get angry. And I completely understand that. We have shared the information since the State of the Territory, and even before. We've consistently said that this year was going to be a very difficult year. As I said, I've met with the unions 4 times. We've constantly shared with the legislature what's taking place. I've appeared before both chambers of commerce, let them know what's taking place. I've gone before the Hotel Association. So we've shared information. I don't think that people were putting it all together to a certain extent, and we'll continue to communicate, continue to go out there. We have the benefit of only having one level of government. which means that any decision we make goes straight to the consumer, goes straight down to our taxpayer. We don't have the luxury of going through 3 levels of government. So there's a direct connection. And as long as we continue to communicate, I think people will understand. But at the end of the day, it is very difficult times. And even though it's difficult, we continue to do some of the more important things in our community. We still have the baseball tournaments to keep our young folks engaged in what's taking place. We had the summer reading program. We opened up the library this weekend for our children. So even as we're dealing with these tremendous financial situations, we at the same time recognize that our community has to continue to prosper, has to continue to function, and we're trying to juggle both at the same time.
So why not make the hard cut decisions and hold people accountable for their jobs and do the layoffs? Why didn't we go that route? I understand, the sides and whatnot,
Sure.
but do you think the Senate was afraid to make those hardball decisions?
I don't know. I think the Senate had a different take on it than I did. I clearly have the authority as governor to still do the dismissals if I deem it necessary. But what I don't think would have been beneficial to our community is if the Senate did the 8% and I still did the reductions. I think that would have been a double hit on the community, particularly in a small community where we have so many connections. So I agreed with the Senate to at least take and see what we can achieve during this 3-month period of time, see what we could get through incentivizing. Even with that, however, even if we achieve that, we achieve the numbers we're looking for, we still have about a $40 million deficit going into fiscal year 2012, which the budgetary process they're going through now hopefully will address it. There was a 0.5% increase in the gross receipts. They're completely against an additional increase in the gross receipts, which I completely understand. I recognize the impact on business and the flow through to the consumer. They previously had opposed the unpaid holidays. Not that we took the holidays away, but that employees would not get paid for it. So in the absence of accepting those proposals, I presume the Senate will come up with alternatives that they feel that the community is willing to accept, and they're willing to accept. But ultimately, my requirement is I have to have a balanced budget. I have to match resources with the ability to not just meet payroll, but meet the most basic of needs, whether that's opening of school to residents that we have off island that we have to care for police services, to the picking up of waste in our community. So I have to, that's my responsibility. And so I'm going to work with them to see, can we achieve that? If we can't, then there's some other tough decisions that I will make and I'll have to make by October 1.
Has the administration begun to formulate plans for the next fiscal year with the looming shortfall?
Definitely. I mean, we're looking at what happens if we don't achieve the salary cuts, the reductions that are necessary. What happens if our revenue projections aren't at the level to be able to sustain us? So we're looking at the various scenarios that are necessary beyond October 1 into fiscal year 12. That's the only way that I think we'll be able to manage the resources that are necessary. Most important is that we can't borrow. I think borrowing is no longer an option. There's a complete disagreement of going that way, and there's a reluctance overall to do that. I think we've maxed out on that capability. Revenue increases by taxes or fees are one option to look at, but at the same time I understand the argument that suppresses your economy in terms of the attraction and also the cost to the local consumer and taxpayer. So we're looking at what options are available to us long term, and we continue still to reduce government. We have more folks leaving government, separations from government, than we have in terms of employment taking place. We're only looking at employment if it's federally funded or special funds that's a revenue generator. Overall, we're working with attrition to reduce the size of government, while at the same time recognizing police officers, healthcare workers is a class within the employment that we're taking a particular look at to make sure that we don't jeopardize healthcare services or law enforcement across the territory. So this is very much a difficult time for our community. It's one where I think that individuals need to look at a greater community than the self-interest, quite frankly. It's going to require the business community to step up and be a lot more aggressive, possibly in fees and in taxes and investment. It's one where employees such as myself and across the board, we're taking the 8% cut. We're eliminating travel out of the general fund. We're making adjustments that are necessary. And I'm continuing to hold departments accountable in terms of reducing costs. So with that all in place, I think the foundation is set. There's a number of projects that we're looking at. There are a number of private sector activities that are taking place that going into the latter half of 2012, hopefully we'll begin to see some growth. Because even with the 8%, it reverts back to the full salary in June of 2012, and at the same time, the gross receipts increase goes back down from 4.5% back down to 4%. So we have increased expenses taking place in June of 2012. and we have reduced revenues, at least with respect to the percentage on the gross receipts. So that's going to cause us to really balance very carefully going forward the next year and a half.
Right. Now, suppose the outcome of the court case isn't ruled in favor of the government of the Virgin Islands, where the 8% cuts don't, cease to exist. What will be the next step?
Then the next step will be for me to look at whether it's appealable. Do I think we should appeal, or to just make the decision right then and there that will go towards the dismissals as an option. The budgetary impact is tremendous. Making sure that we're able to maintain resources so we continue to pay our obligations. And again, those obligations are, in addition to salaries, are just basic obligations in our communities that we have to meet. And at that point, I'll make the decision to continue with the dismissals or look at maybe appealing. At that point in time, then a decision will be made. And I'm hoping that the union membership will at least talk to the leadership and say, it is better for us to have a universal sacrifice than the decision be made that we need to send home 600 to 700 employees. And that's important because if we're not able to identify resources to fill the gap going into fiscal year 12, then that 600 number could clearly double. So that's an even drastic, a much more far-reaching impact within our community. And that's why I think that the 8% as a compromise at least achieves a certain amount of stability. It doesn't achieve everything that's needed, but at least it spreads it across the board. If we don't have the 8% and we go towards the dismissals and we're not able to come up with the creativity for fiscal year 12, then that 600 is just the first step of what could be even additional dismissals.
Has your office reached out to any other states or territories to see what plans have worked for them or the plans that did not?
We're constantly looking at what other states and territories have done. In my discussions with other governors, one of the most immediate reactions that we get, and even individuals that go away on business will tell us, is they're surprised we've not done layoffs, that we've not had massive closures or consolidations, whether it be of offices or programs. And they find that to be somewhat amazing to to a very large extent. But if you look across the board, from layoffs of teachers in New York City to the reduction of consolidations of programs in Florida, Washington, D.C. has also cut back in terms of law enforcement and also in terms of healthcare. You're seeing that across the board, everyone is going through the very same problems that we're having. And there's no way that as a territory and an economy that depends on the United States, and principally on the eastern shoreboard of the United States, there's no way that we can't feel that effect ultimately. And the question is, how do we cushion it and how do we spread it across the board? And we're talking the Stabilization Act and the 8%. Let's keep in mind that we have a 1.7 million unfunded liability. We made the decision to increase the contributions in government from 14% to 17.5%. Even that is inadequate. If we want to fully fund GERS, we need to increase that to $70 million a year, by $70 million a year. In addition to that, we have workmen's compensation, which has a deficit in it at the same time. So there are other obligations we have, which we fully explained and exposed and told people about that, we also need to address. So the Economic Stabilization Act takes care of the general fund, but it doesn't address the host of other areas that have to be addressed and clearly can impact tremendously, because at some point, the number of retirees to active employees will tip the other way. And so we have to make sure that we reduce the unfunded liability by some means so that the cash that is going out of GERS, we can begin to lessen or at least reduce so that that doesn't put it at risk. Because their projection is that GERS is insolvent within 14 years. And that's really right around the corner.
Right. Are we also keeping an eye on what's going on in Washington right now with the debt ceiling and what may happen if things remain at a stalemate?
Well, for us, as is the tremendous impact on programs. We have a tremendous amount of federal programs that will clearly have an impact there. We also have our rum excise program that we're keeping a very sharp and close eye on. But when you look at the Department of Health, you look at Department of Human Services, those departments alone depend on a tremendous amount of federal resources coming in. Any reduction in that level will have a tremendous impact on the social services, whether it range from food stamps to mental health coverage to our HIV programs. So keeping an eye on it is something that clearly we have our advisors in D.C., contact with the delegates office, the senators that have always been extremely supportive to the Virgin Islands, are making sure that we're looked at and we're protected to whatever extent possible.
So, Governor, do you see a light at the end of the tunnel, or are there more just dark days to come?
I think they're difficult days. I think 2012 will be a turning point. I think it will be a very difficult year. not just in terms of a calendar, but the fiscal year, I think until the end of it. But I think that the foundation is set. I think the VINGN projects, I think the Art Research and Technology Park, I think the Diageo project, Cruise and Rum, will give us some stability. The fact that additional airlift is coming in. If we can get some of these hotel projects to at least have the ability to get financing, I think we've got an ability to at least continue to grow. Our procurement practices, more that we spend with our local contractors, will cause funding to be circulated in our economy. The training programs, as individuals are laid off, we have training programs that are in industries at least where there's some semblance of hiring. I think all of that gives me a tremendous amount of hope. So do I think that there's light at the end of the tunnel? I do. I think now is the most bumpiest of times. I think people are concerned about the 8%, as I'm concerned about the 8%. I think retirees are concerned about their pension program, their pension payments, as they should be, and I am just as concerned. So if we can get past the next 12 months without us just thinking of ourselves, but more thinking of how we can stabilize and put the community in a solid foundation, I think we can get past. And I really do believe that people here have the fortitude to do it. It just takes leadership. It requires myself and the legislature not to be fighting, that we may disagree, but as long as we can be on the same path and towards an objective of making sure that we maintain employment, have opportunities for growth, and reduce expenses, and at the same time continue to give opportunities, I think people will see that and they'll work with us to go along the same path.
All right. Well, Governor, thanks for coming in to speak
Thank
to
you.
us about this very important issue. And of course, you can count on News 2 to keep you updated on everything that goes on with the current fiscal crisis here in the Virgin Islands. Sandy, back to you.